Cents Per Mile, featuring Charles Gracie, Paul Gibson, and Josh Haynes. Everyone knows the trucking industry has issues, but most people are afraid to talk about it.
Someone's got to do it.
With loads of recruiting and marketing experience and backed by the largest driver audience in the world, we deliver carriers the driver perspective, find solutions, and help make sense make sense.
Welcome to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes. What's going on, guys? What are we talking about today?
We're talking about equipment. What drivers really want in equipment.
Yep. What drivers really want in equipment. And some of the things that companies pose as great equipment that drivers really don't actually care about. But that being said, just so you know, we have to say it on every episode, we are on Spotify, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on Apple Podcasts, basically anywhere you listen, and YouTube. So if you could, rate the podcast, like, subscribe, that kind of thing. It pushes us further out, and gets more eyes on our stuff.
You can also find us at centspermilepodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic, you can suggest to be a guest, or even to be a sponsor.
Speaking of sponsors, Charles, who's our sponsors today?
Our sponsors today are Decker Truck Lines, driven to be the best. You should check them out at drivedecker.com, and Mesilla Valley Transport, m-v-t.com.
All right, well, I think it's time for the news. All right, so it's time for 10-2 News, where normally we would go over the coolest and craziest news stories we found over the last couple weeks on CDLLife.com, but this week, we decided we would show you some footage when Charles went down to Atlanta for FreightWaves' Future of the Supply Chain. All right, well, that looked a lot of fun. I got to see some of the stuff of, driving some of the Porsches, which looked really fun, and I was kind of jealous that we got left back home. But that being said, I'm sure there was a lot more substance to it than just the fun you guys had. What happened down there, Charles?
FreightWaves always throws an amazing event, and this one was no exception to that. Besides, like you said, seeing that we had gone to the Porsche Performance Center, gotten to ride in the Porsches and do donuts. I got to beat Dooner on the simulator. But even more than that was the content and the people there presenting the new technology that's coming into the freight industry. So it was really cool to go around and talk to the people, see about all the different innovations that's coming into the space, and then hear about the forecast of what people foresee happening.
All right. And so when that happened, did you got any cool insights that you can bring back to us?
Define cool, because the general census there is that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel is still very long.
Yeah, that checks out. So that's kind of where a lot of the predictions were earlier in the year, that yes, it may get better, but it's not going to get notably better. So they at least think we're stabilized, right?
As stabilized as trucking can be. But it's much to the point of what I've said in the past, that, this isn't our first time that you've seen the industry go through this roller coaster. And just like everything that goes up must come down. We're at what appears to be the bottom, and it's just maintaining right there. But things are showing signs of in time improving, and people are just going to have to pay attention to the foundation of their business.
All right. Well, speaking of people who, feel the way that things are going in the supply chain, it's time to go behind the wheel. All right, so it's time for Behind the Wheel. So being powered by CDLLife, we have access to the world's largest driver network, and we can ask them questions, so we get real opinions from real drivers about real issues. And this week we asked them, what features matter most to you when choosing a truck, and what features do trucking companies think are good, but you don't really care about? And so for what matters most, about 16% said comfortability. They do live in those things. 50% said reliability, because if you're not moving, you're not making money. That checks out. And about 25% brought up they wish there were more options for manual trucks. As far as what trucking companies think are good, The vast majority went on about driver-facing cameras and auto braking sensors, which essentially one driver constantly referred to it as safety features that want to kill me.
I mean, that checks out, but my takeaway is 25% of drivers want a manual truck. And right now there's too many trucks or drivers on the road in this market. That's what everyone says will self-correct. So maybe if we put manuals out there, it'll correct itself.
Well, and I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, it's one of those things where, it tends to be one size fit all. And I understand that, like those are expensive assets. But a lot of people do just go buy a fleet of the exact same truck, which, does save you a lot of problems, especially in orientation when it comes to picking a truck, etc. But it's like, are those trucks really optimized for the people who are in them?
Well, I think that's a great time to go behind the desk with Tenstreet.
Well, hey there. My name is Christy Choice. I'm a professional services consultant at Tenstreet, and I also work very heavily with our safety management suite of products. And from our side, it seems like relatively few drivers actually pick equipment as one of their top concerns, like when they're looking for their next employer. It seems like we're trying to say that by definition, most things, in safety involve both the driver and equipment. And so to your earlier point, it seems like about 50% just want a reliable vehicle, right? They want reliable equipment that helps them do their job more efficiently, more faster. And from where we sit, it seems like, we want our clients to know, and everybody to know really, that the same place where you manage your drivers is the same place you can manage your equipment. Our safety management suite includes equipment. And so at any level that you want to engage, that's a really, really good thing. But it no longer has to be like spreadsheets and paper. And, we need to bring equipment to the forefront as well. And so that's from our perspective here. We're seeing that the data really just says, hey, they want a reliable equipment. And for carriers, I think the concern is, having somewhere to manage that information. And so it's more of an interconnected solution for them that helps them move farther, faster.
All right, so it's time to make sense and cover our main topic, which is equipment that drivers actually want. So I've spent some time in the truck riding along over the road, but ultimately Charles has spent a lot more time in a truck than I have. So Charles, what, having been a driver, what does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it was important that I had something that was reliable. At the end of the day, I'm there to do a job. So as long as I can get from point A to B and keep rolling, I made money, the company made money, everyone was happy. Over time, they started introducing all this new stuff, the collision assistant, avoidance assistance, the driver inward facing camera, which was the most expensive hat rack I ever had in my truck. There was all kinds of things being implemented. I mean, when I started driving, there was no e-logs. So it's changed quite a bit. But at the end of the day, for me, it was just reliability. I will say that I had truck preference, but it didn't always matter to the carrier I worked for.
Yeah, and I mean, and I've even noticed driving in different types of trucks that there is a huge difference in the handling and the way they go down the road. I mean, there's a reason why a certain company gets the word shaker put on the end of their name.
Though, there's the small things that matter. So like internationals, I had to drive an international. They turn on a dime, but whoever designed those, and hopefully internationals tuning in, they put the cup holder so low that you bend down to put your cup in. And if you hit a pothole or anything, you bust your lip on the steering wheel.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I imagine that there's a lot of slight differences that, make all the difference, because like even outside of functionality, sure, it's a tool, but I mean, especially when you're over the road, you're spending more nights in there than you are at home.
Well, it is your home, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. And the companies that do it right take that driver's feedback. A lot of companies pick one brand of truck, and that's what they run with. And there's a lot of reasons they do that makes sense. One of them is having a stockpile of parts, so no matter whether the industry has a shortage, they've already built up a surplus, so they can service those trucks and keep them rolling. Another reason is driver's preference. It falls shorter on the list for some carriers than others. But at the end of the day, it's also the stuff you put in there. There's some base stuff that back in the day wasn't as important, but having fridges, having inverters, these things matter. Some companies have even gone as far as outfitting them with TVs and stuff to make that comfort feel more like it's home, since you're spending so much of your time in it.
Oh yeah, and shout out to Decker on the very many things that they offer for comfortability. But that being said, talking about companies that only offer one brand of truck, while that's common, what do you think about a company who only offers one brand of truck, but they actually offer different models instead of just having one?
Well, I think that speaks to somebody that was talking to the driver corps, and some drivers expressed interest in different models within that brand. There's also, depending on the job, you're not going to use the same type of truck generally for flatbed work or heavy hauling that you're going to use for hauling regular commodities in a dry van. Those drivers need certain specs to be comfortable with that truck, whether they're going through mountains or they're doing local driving. Like I used to have to drive a long nose while driving in Chicago. That wasn't ideal for driving downtown and hauling fuel, but it made sense at the time of the purchase.
Well, speaking of companies that only have one brand of truck but have multiple models of the same truck, we have Stephan from Hurricane Express. How's it going, man?
It's going good. How are you guys today?
Oh, doing pretty good. So we've worked together a bunch doing video stuff. It's literally one of my favorites because your trucks basically film themselves. So you guys got 389s, you got just like you've got so many different styles of trucks, and within those trucks, they're all customized individually. None of them have the same paint. The interior, like you guys do wood cabinets, like all kinds of stuff. So a lot of people do go with the same model across the board, same style for the most part, or they'll offer the same truck, but they'll have like three different brands, but all the same model. You guys have a plethora of trucks. So, like, what trucks do you have now, and why does this customization and the individuality in the trucks and what you offer? How do you make that happen, and why do you make that happen?
Well, we are currently running four different models of Peterbilts. We have 579s, 567s, 389s, and then we have stretch 389s that are 333-inch wheelbase. And we understand that not every operator has the same goal or desires while they're on the road. And so we create custom options to each one. Some drivers want to have the old school look. Some drivers are more concerned about fuel economy. And we just want to have something to offer each type of operator that's out there.
Yeah, and I think that's super cool, and that kind of speaks volumes too. Because especially when it comes to because you guys do a lease purchase, regardless if you're watching how you feel about that. I think it's really interesting that having talked to Caden, the owner, one of the things that he's all about is like, yes, this truck might be less fuel efficient, but that's what that driver wants to actually own, and that's more important to me than that, as long as that driver can maintain profitability.
And we run late model equipment, like you guys alluded to earlier, is keep them on the road, because if their wheels aren't turning, they're not earning, right? So we also not only have the different models, but like you mentioned, custom paint. We have a custom paint shop that does some amazing work, and it gives the operators something to be proud of when they are on the road or when they pull into a shipper receiver or truck stop. Their equipment looks good, they're happy to be in it, and they want to keep moving across the country.
And that's huge, because these drivers are buying this truck over time and they're spending all this money to do it, and you're helping give them what they want versus, hey, this is the cookie cutter mold we have, you're spending all this money and you just need to learn to like it. So it means you're listening to the driver and you actually care about their success long term.
Yeah, the customization really gives them an opportunity to feel like it's something that they want, whether it's wood cabinets inside or custom paint on the APU or the interior. It really gives them that sense of pride in what they have.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I've ever actually been in a truck with hardwood flooring. It was pretty. Some of the stuff you guys do is pretty amazing. And I mean, you guys also still do have company drivers as well, so it's not all lease purchase.
Correct.
With that though, one thing that I've noticed being around too is a lot of people might look at that whole, hey, that truck has less fuel economy, you're setting that driver up to fail. One thing that I've noticed that you guys do, especially with Caden's experience having been a driver, you guys actually go in an orientation, which I've filmed, and actually he'll actually walk them through step by step, depending on what truck they have, the best way to like shift and like when to fuel and all of that. Like he goes over everything they need. And I've interviewed drivers who follow that and are successful.
Yes, absolutely. We set our equipment up different than most other companies. So whenever they come here, having come out of a 9 or 10 speed, whatever they're used to driving, and get into one of our trucks with an 18 speed, we run the Cummins X15 engines. And each one of those, you're going to shift differently than what you did previously. So we explain where the torque is on the engine. From our trucks are set where they have peak torque from 1100 or 1000 to 1400. So they have a 400 RPM range of peak torque. And we explain to them how to get the most out of each gear, how to pull hills most efficiently, downshift efficiently. Once you do that, you can really increase that fuel economy. And, that's at the end of the day where you're going to really save your money instead of giving it to the fuel stop, is by the way you operate your truck. No matter who you drive for, the way you operate that truck will make you extra money each week.
That's huge. That's someone that's listening to the drivers, investing in the drivers, and taking the time to set them up the correct way for success, which their success dictates yours in that scenario. So I think that's cool. If someone wanted to get a hold of you guys, where would they find you?
They can find us on the internet at hurricaneexpress.com, or they can reach us at any time at 877-379-7383.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mesilla Valley Transportation, founded by truck drivers for truck drivers. Why choose MVT? Well, it's simple.
I started off as a driver. Now I'm managing routes. With MVT, the sky's the limit.
Balance is key. State-of-the-art equipment, a strong focus on safety, and a family-driven company culture where respect and hard work are at the core. Mesilla Valley Transportation, where we care about you. Join our family today.
Yeah, that was some great stuff. But, there's other stuff that goes into equipment and safety features, all that money that companies are dumping into these trucks to have the drivers be safer on the road, to have the general motoring public feel safer with the trucks on the road. And does it actually make the experience better? And does it actually make it safer?
Well, I think first off, I would be amiss if I didn't say what I normally say and just immediately go for insurance companies. Yeah. But that being said, yeah, it's one of those things where I think a lot of it translates to that stuff started happening in passenger vehicles. And it's awesome. Like, I love the warnings that someone's up on the side of me, especially when I'm in a lot of traffic. But a lot of the things that come with that, like the automatic braking, it works very similar to the way that it would work in a passenger vehicle. But the problem is like in a truck, trucks don't handle or stop the way a passenger vehicle stops or accelerate. That's why we leave them that space in front of the truck. So you can't just copy and paste that to a truck.
Well, and they were in the truck even back when I was driving. I remember when the collision avoidance system got implemented, and in its early stages, it was terrifying. I was a night driver, and I'd be taking those cars with the guardrails with the little reflectors, and sometimes it would pick up on that and hit the brakes. Well, imagine being in winter conditions where it's slippery and then applying the brakes. I mean, it would scare the crap out of you. Or the best story I have on that is they have those lane detection systems where it detects if you're crossing over the lines into another lane. Well, they failed to tell us that they put those in our trucks over the weekend. And one day I'm driving, and I was in a construction area where the lines get very confusing because they're new ones, old ones. and it just went, "Brrr." I about leapt out of my seat. I'm in that big truck and you just, and it's deafening. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so drivers focus so hard on trying to not embrace that stuff because it wasn't educated properly. It wasn't communicated properly. And I think that's where a lot of companies need to put their focus. It's not necessarily that drivers are abrasive to the change. People need to educate them on the whys and how it works a little bit better preemptively to have a better response with adopting those systems into the truck.
Yeah, and I think so that reminds me of, like, I was talking to one guy who basically his froze over. And so, like, he had to go scrape it off because he could really get his truck to move. So it's like, because I know that they've come a long way, but it used to be, yeah, if anything obstructed that, like, you're not doing anything.
And they avoided it for a while, like early stages. I'm sure it's still happening. You had drivers putting tape or foil over the systems on the bumper. You had drivers unplugging the speakers. You had guys like myself that used those inward facing cameras as hat racks. I would love to see in the comments what some of the new things people are doing to circumvent these systems. But also I want to encourage carriers to take the time to explain them and make people comfortable with them. Have those conversations.
Yeah, and I mean they definitely do have their place, but I don't know. It's just one of those things. I feel like it takes away just a little bit more professionalism that the drivers have. They're the captain of the ship, but also now the ship thinks for itself. I think that's a little odd to me. But that being said, we have another guest.
Yeah, we got Mike Wilson. He's the CEO of Consolidated Chassis Management. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, so outside of just the equipment in the truck that makes drivers' jobs desirable and easier, there's things outside like the trailers and the chassis. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you're helping combat that.
Yeah, so if you guys go back many years, I think you'll recall that the chassis in general in the maritime community were okay. I mean, they were functional, but they weren't really let's call it modern tech oriented for driver safety or for road safety. Over the past 10 years or so, things have evolved. And more recently for us, CCM, we initiated a new chassis pool in the South Atlantic called SACP 3.0. And what we decided to do was to take the fleet that we were operating, about 45,000 chassis in the South Atlantic that were averaged about 20 years old. And they had old components on them. They had hub spoke wheels. They didn't have anti-lock brakes. They didn't have radial tires. And what we're doing is we're taking the entire fleet and refurbishing it to have hub piloted wheels, which, as you know, are far more safe to operate, and they actually are a better mechanism for tire wear and tear. We're putting all radials on these chassis. We're putting anti-lock brakes on all of these chassis. And we're putting heavy-duty components, particularly for the South Atlantic, on the legs. So we're evolving the chassis as a piece of equipment to be more reliable for the motor carrier. And one of the things that we heard, and we actually went out to the motor carrier community and we polled them, we said, okay, what's good and what's not good about the South Atlantic pool? This was back in early 23. And they said, look, you have biased tires on a lot of these chassis. You don't have anti-lock brakes. You have hub spoke wheels. And, we don't like being broken down on the side of the road, losing time, plus the whole safety factor. So we decided that with the rollout of 3.0, we would upgrade the fleet to be as safety conscious and quality conscious as we could, because we know if the driver's broken down, he's not moving freight. And the whole idea of a chassis is to make sure the freight is moving and that the supply chain is fluid.
Yeah, I think that's important because I did rails early in my driving career, and I'll tell you, the whole chassis pool thing is a whole experience, and you either embrace it or you don't, and you avoid it. I remember going in and picking them up and going to crank the dolly legs and one of them just disintegrating in my hand. So anything anyone could do to help make that more desirable and more efficient so the drivers can grab their containers and hit the road. I mean, this is by design what it's supposed to be like. So tell us a little bit about the pool that you guys have built up and the availability of what you guys are doing.
Sure. So prior to October 1st, when we launched SACP 3.0, we were owned by OCEMA, the Ocean Carriers Equipment Management Association, who's a group of ocean carriers that, along with the ports and chassis providers, put together this great pool. And the great pool concept makes good sense because full interoperability means that any chassis can go under any box and be picked up and dropped off at any node in the network. And it makes it real convenient for truckers. They can pick up a box in Savannah and then drop it off in Atlanta and then grab something else and go elsewhere, so that they have that flexibility on their transport. In October, we were actually acquired by a private equity company called Oaktree Capital. And Oaktree decided that the model was sound, but the company, CCM, needed to have full control of the business. So prior to 3.0, the equipment providers put the equipment in and CCM just managed the fleet. Now we actually own and operate the fleet, and we're able to make sure that the fleet is meeting the quality standards, make sure the fleet is in the right place at the right time, and also making sure we have enough chassis in the right place so when a driver shows up, he has a chassis to put under a box. So this entire concept really is a public-private type of an operation where we cooperate with the ports of Jacksonville, Savannah, and Wilmington, North Carolina. And together we put together this model, and we believe it's the best model out there. We think that interoperability as a base operating philosophy is solid, and that's the way the industry should be moving. And we think that with the single point of contact management now, that CCM controls everything, and the philosophy that we need to upgrade this fleet. Just as an anecdotal metric, the fleet was averaging 20 years old back in 23. And by the time we're finished with the refurbishment program in 4 years, the average age will be under 4 years old. So we'll have good, modern, safe, well-equipped chassis out on the road.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. So if someone wanted to get a hold of you guys, how would they do so?
So they can go right to our website, ccmpool.com, and we have full set of contact information as well as metrics relative to how we're operating and where we're operating. We explain the business plan, and we explain the documents needed to operate within the pool. So you go to ccmpool.com and you'll be able to see everything you need if you want to participate.
That's great stuff. Well, thanks for coming on Cents Per Mile.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I hope that if you watch this, you feel better equipped, to think about it really when you're picking out equipment for your drivers. That being said, I think it's time.
Yeah. I mean, we covered the trucks. We covered the outside the truck and what goes inside the truck to make it desirable. So I think it's time to get out of here. So thanks for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.